What's up, y'all? Roy here, and you were listening to the Clemens with a Z podcast. Now, I was reading this book yesterday for research and just general ideas for the podcast and Substack and all that stuff. And it was written by an evangelical pastor. And it's a book about what he called, quote unquote, biblical manhood. Somewhere in the beginning of it, in kind of like the opening forward section, he writes, "We live in a world that wants you to apologize for being a man." And he went on talking about how in God's kingdom, you don't have to check your quote unquote man card at the door. And when I read that, I just kind of stopped because it wasn't that I immediately disagreed. I mean, I do disagree 100%, but it was generally out of this like confusion because I didn't know what he was talking about. Because if I'm going to be honest with you, and I hope that you hear this, I don't feel like I've ever been asked to apologize for just being a man. Have I been called out for something I said or did? Yes, of course. And I apologized for that. Have I been called to look at how I show up in certain spaces? Absolutely. But that feels different to me than what he's describing. And then, and this part is what really got me, he anchored the entire argument in this single line from First Corinthians, a line that in some translations reads, "Act like men." Not just a reference, not just a supporting idea, but an entire framework, an entire book written around this one line. And that's where something in me really started to push back. Because what I keep coming back to when people say these things like, you have to apologize for being a man and we're under attack and stuff like that. At the end of the day, I think it's stupid. Because I don't think that what they're talking about and what everyone else is talking about is the same thing. Because when I hear language like the world wants men to apologize or you don't have to check your man card, it sounds like the conversation is about men, like men themselves are the thing that is under attack. But when I look around, that's not what I'm seeing challenged. I don't see a culture attacking men for existing. What I see is a culture asking harder questions, voicing their concerns, and the questions about behavior, about power, about assumptions that have been tied to masculinity for a long time. And those are not the same thing. Because some of what's being questioned right now are patterns that for a long time were just accepted, things that they called normal, things like dominating conversations and calling it leadership, shutting down emotionally and calling it strength, reacting with anger instead of actually reflecting, avoiding accountability while expecting respect. And here's the tension. A lot of those behaviors got wrapped up in what we were told, quote unquote, being a man looks like. So when those behaviors get challenged, sure, on some level it can feel personal. It can feel like they're coming after men. What's actually happening, from what I'm seeing, is we're just reevaluating what we've been told is acceptable. And if part of your identity is built on one of those behaviors, it's going to feel like a threat, even if it isn't one. And there's another layer here that's a little harder to name. Because for a long time, in a lot of spaces, especially in church, men have been held as the kind of default authority, sometimes intentionally, not always aggressively, but structurally. And now that's shifting, as it should shift. More voices are being heard. More people are asking who gets to lead, who gets to speak, who gets to define things. And that's amazing. And when something in you that's been used starts to move, sure, it can feel like something is being taken from you, which can easily get interpreted as quote unquote men are under attack. But sometimes, really, what I'm seeing is just the ground is leveling out. That doesn't mean it's easy, but it does mean it's different than what it's being framed as. And underneath all of it, underneath the behaviors, the power dynamics, the abuse, are the stories a lot of us were handed. Be strong, not emotional. Lead, don't follow. Provide, fix, protect. Don't hesitate, don't doubt. Earn respect through control or competence. Those things run deep. So when culture starts questioning them, pushing back on them, it's not just a surface level disagreement. It does hit identity, because if those scripts start to crack, underneath becomes, well, then what does it even mean to be a man? And that's not a small question. That's the kind of question that makes people reach for clarity fast. And I think that's what's happening in these conversations. Not just a defense of men, but a defense of a version of masculinity that feels clear, stable, certain, in power, on top, all of that. And sure, you want clarity. We all do. I get it. It's good. Defined roles feel safe, right? But if that clarity comes from building something big on something we haven't really slowed down to understand, I think we're solving the wrong problem. So I want to go back to the verse that's carrying all of this weight. Act like men. It comes from 1 Corinthians 16:13 through 14. In that, Paul writes, "Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong, let all that you do be done in love." And on the surface, I get it, you might get it. If you're already thinking in categories of biblical manhood, that phrase feels like a direct hit, right? Clear, simple, actionable. But if you slow down and you look at it, the less clear it becomes. Because who is Paul talking to? He's not talking to men. In this, he's writing to the entire church in Corinth, a diverse, complicated, often chaotic community. Men, women, different backgrounds, different struggles. This is not a locker room talk to a bunch of guys. It's a closing encouragement to a whole community that's been dealing with division, ego, confusion, and conflict. So, whatever Paul means here, he's not defining manhood, he's speaking to everyone. So, what does quote unquote look like men really mean? So, here's where things start to really shift. I did a little bit of research, a little bit of digging, not a little bit, a good bit of digging. Now, from what I found, the Greek word that is used is androzete. It's Andrizesthe. Androzete. If I mispronounce it, I'm sorry. And while, sure, the word is rooted in the word for man, its meaning and context is a lot closer to be courageous, be brave, and stand firm under pressure. It's nothing to do about masculinity as an identity. It's about courage as a posture. And then here's something else I noticed when I was sitting with that passage. Because I pulled up the same scripture in a different translation. Oh, and I need to respond that the translation that he was using in his book is from the ESV, English Standard Version. There's a lot of different translations of the Bible I could go into. I don't have time for that right now. But anyway, I pulled it up in another translation of the Bible, the Holman Christian Standard Bible. And it's a translation that kind of gets about as mainstream evangelical as it gets. And in that scripture, in that translation, it doesn't even say act like men at all. And I'm going to read it to you. Okay. It says, "Be alert, stand firm in the faith, be brave and strong. Your every action must be done with love." There's no act like men. Not at all. It just says be courageous, be brave and strong. That's it. So phrases like this, like to think about an entire book framed off something that has different translations. On in manhood. It's built on this. One of the most widely used evangelical translations doesn't even use it. And I don't say that to be dismissive. I don't. I say it because it reveals something important. The translators of the HCSB looked at that Greek word and decided the most accurate rendering wasn't act like men, it was just be brave and strong, courageous, which, if we're being honest, kind of hits very differently because now this isn't a gendered command, it's a human one. So, what kind of moment is this? Because this isn't a detailed teaching, it's not a breakdown of roles or identity, it's a closing line. It's a rapid fire series of encouragements. Be watchful, stand firm, be courageous, be strong. And then this, let all that you do be done in love. The last line matters way more than we tend to let it because it reframes everything that came before it. Because courage without love can become aggression, strength without love can become control, firmness without love can become rigidity. So, whatever Paul is probably calling this community into, I don't think it's just about strength. I think it's about how that strength is expressed. So, what are people actually doing with this verse? Because the move that keeps happening, it's a contextual encouragement given to an entire community, and it gets turned into a timeless definition of manhood applied specifically to men. That's not a small shift. That's a whole completely different conversation. And that's where my tension comes from. Not that the verse is wrong, not that courage isn't important, but that something meant to call all people into courage and love gets narrowed into something much more specific, much more rigid, much more loaded. And what happens when we build something this big on something we haven't fully slowed down to understand? A lot of abuse, a lot of control, just a big, giant mess. And I want to be clear here. I want to shift it a little bit. This isn't about one book or one pastor or one verse. It's a pattern. And once you see it, it's really hard to unsee. It usually starts small. A verse gets quoted, a phrase stands out, something feels clear, direct, easy to apply, and clarity feels good, especially when you're talking about something as personal as identity. Then something subtle happens. The one verse gets pulled out of its larger context, it gets repeated, simplified, reinforced, and over time, it starts to carry way more weight than it was ever meant to. And before long, you're not just reading a text anymore, you're building a framework, something people can organize their entire lives around. And I don't necessarily believe that everyone is doing this maliciously. I like to think that the goal is actually the opposite, to give people something clear, something stable, something to hold on to, because life is complicated. Identity is complicated and complexity is uncomfortable. So we reach for clarity, we define things, we draw lines. But the tension for me and maybe for everyone is this: the clarity isn't always the same thing as truth. And something can feel clear while still being incomplete. These texts weren't written as bullet points. They weren't written as modern self-help frameworks. They were written to specific people in specific moments dealing with specific issues. And when we skip over that, we don't just simplify, we reshape to fit our needs. That's what happens. And that reshaping doesn't stay theoretical, it starts forming people. It shapes how they see themselves, how they measure themselves, how they relate to others. So the bigger question underneath all of this is, are we letting the text speak? Or are we asking it to support something that we've already decided? And at some point, I realized if I'm going to read something that shapes how I see myself, my identity, my purpose, how I move through the world, I don't want to just accept it because it sounds clear. I want to understand what I'm actually reading. So I started slowing down, not in some overly academic way. I'm not trying to become a scholar overnight, just asking better questions, really 6 of them, real simple ones. Who, what, where, when, why, and why. It's very simple. If you're a teacher in elementary school, these are the 6 questions that we use when we're teaching language arts. Let me expand on them a little bit. I'll start with who. Who is speaking and who are they speaking to? Because there's a difference between a letter to a specific community and a universal statement meant for all people at all times. If I skip that, I can easily turn something contextual into something absolute. Second one, what? What is actually being said? Not what I've heard it means, not what someone told me it represents. What's actually there? Because sometimes the meaning we've inherited isn't the meaning that's present. The third one, when? When was this written? What was happening in that moment? Because timing matters, it really does. Statement made in the middle of a conflict or correction is going to carry different weight than something written as a general teaching. Okay? Let's move on to the next one. Where? Where is this taking place? Bible wasn't written in a vacuum. It was written in real places with real customs, real pressures, and real social structures. And if I ignore that, I start reading it as if it just dropped straight into my world unchanged. Next one, why? Why is this being said or written? Because most of these writings weren't random, they were responses. And if I don't understand the problem, I'm going to misunderstand the solution. Okay. Last one, how? And maybe that's the most honest one. How am I reading this? What assumptions am I bringing into it? What do I already believe that might be shaping what I see? Because I'm not neutral, none of us are. And look, these aren't complicated questions. They don't require a degree, but they do something very important. They slow us down. They've slowed me down. They create space between what's actually there and what I've been told is there. And that space is where I start to realize maybe I don't need to rush to a conclusion. Maybe I can just sit with it long enough to actually understand it. And when I do that, I'm a lot less likely to take one line and turn it into something that it was never meant to carry. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about interpretation, it's about formation. When we take something small and build something big on top of it, it doesn't just stay on the page, it shapes people. It shapes what they think they're supposed to be, what they believe they're failing at, what they feel like they have to live up to. And I've felt that. Maybe not exactly in this conversation around manhood, but in the broader experience of being handed a framework and being told, this is what it means to do it right. And when your life doesn't quite fit that framework, you don't question the framework, you question yourself. Am I doing this wrong? Am I not enough? Am I missing something everyone else seems to understand? And that's really where it starts to get heavy because now we're not talking about ideas. We're talking about people trying to find their footing, make sense of themselves, heal from things that they don't fully understand yet. And into that space, we offer certainty built on something that we haven't fully examined. And that's the part that sits with me. Not that someone quoted a verse, but that we speak with confidence about things this personal, identity, purpose, worth, without always doing the work to understand what we're standing on. Because partial truths presented as total truths don't just inform people, they form them. And when those foundations start to crack, it's not just a theological issue, it's personal, it's emotional. Sometimes it's years of trying to untangle what was actually true and what was just handed to you. And if we're going to speak into people's lives like this, if we're going to shape how they see themselves, how they relate to God, how they move through the world, how they relate to anything, it really matters what we build on because people don't just hear these ideas, they carry them. And I want to pause here for a second because everything I just said, I don't think is just about scripture. We do this everywhere. We take one small thing, one moment, one post, one line, and we build something enormous on top of it. If you think about it, I kind of just did it right here, right? Somebody sees one Instagram post about something like hustle culture or whatever, and they restructure their entire relationship with rest. Someone reads one tweet about masculinity and suddenly has a framework for what a quote unquote real man is supposed to look like. Or someone watches one short video about relationships and starts measuring their marriage against it. We don't even notice it's happening much anymore, do we? Because it does feel like clarity. It feels like finally having language for something. It feels like someone just said the thing you've been trying to say. But there's a difference between something resonating with you and something being true enough to build on. And I think that gap between resonance and foundation is where a lot of us are living right now because we are swimming in content, aren't we? More voices, more takes, more frameworks than any generation before us has ever had to sort through. And all of it is competing to hand you an identity, a way of seeing yourself, a way of measuring yourself. So the question that I keep asking myself, whether I'm reading a Bible verse or scrolling through Instagram feed, is the same question. What is this actually saying? Who is saying it and why? And what am I being asked to build on top of it? Because the stakes are the same whether it's a sermon or a post. People don't just consume these ideas, they carry them. They build lives on them. And that really deserves more than a scroll. So maybe the answer isn't to throw everything out. And maybe it's not to double down on certainty either. Maybe it's about something simpler, slower, more honest. What if we let the text or the post or whatever it is be what it is before we decide what it means for us? What if we resisted the urge to immediately turn it into a system or a framework or a definition? What if something like be watchful, stand firm, be courageous, be strong, do everything in love, was it a blueprint for some kind of manhood, but an invitation into something deeper? Not a standard to perform, but a posture to grow into. Because the more I sit with it, the less I'm convinced that this is about defending what it means to be a man. And the more I wonder if it's about something else entirely. Maybe it's about learning how to be present, grounded, honest, and courageous enough to question what we've been handed. Not so we lose ourselves, but so we don't build our lives on something that we never really stopped to understand. Maybe the question isn't, do men need to reclaim their identity? Maybe it's, what kind of identity are we building in the first place? What is it built on? So that's what I got for you today. These are the kinds of questions I've been sitting with as I read, listen, and try to make sense of all this. If it resonated, it with someone who's been thinking about the same things. And I'll see you next time. Peace. Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Clemens with a Z. If something in this conversation resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at clemenswithaz@gmail.com or send a DM over at Instagram at the Clemens with a Z podcast Instagram page. If you'd like to support the podcast, the easiest way is by subscribing, rating, and leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can share it with a friend, post on your socials, drop it in a group chat. All of it helps more than you know. You can support the podcast financially if you'd like to. You can head over to clemenswithaz.com. There's a store with shirts, stickers, and all kinds of stuff. And you can also donate directly through the GoFundMe that I've set up, the links in the show notes. Every little bit of this goes a long way in helping me keep these conversations going. If you're looking for something else, maybe you're a reader instead of listener, check out my Substack, Devotions for the Disillusioned and the Deconstructing. That's where I share other reflections, devotionals, and some extra behind the scenes thoughts that don't always make it onto the podcast. You know, this podcast keeps going because of all of y'all listening, showing up, engaging, and passing it on. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening and for being a part of this messy middle with me. So until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.